Let me ask you a question that should keep every powerful man in America awake at night. What's dumber, lying about your connection to Jeffrey Epstein, or lying when you know millions of documents proving the truth are about to be dumped on the American people by your own administration? Because that's the level of magical thinking we're dealing with right now. And nowhere is it clearer than with Howard Lutnick, Trump's commerce secretary, tariff architect, Wall Street titan, a man who told the American people one story while the Epstein files tell another. Here's what I don't understand. These men know they're in the files. We may not have known it. The public may not have known it, but they knew. They knew about the meetings. They knew about the island visits. They knew about the planes, the yachts, the homes, the money, the favors. They knew about Ghislaine Maxwell. They knew about Jeffrey Epstein. They knew that young girls and young women were being treated like commodities, trafficked, scheduled, exchanged, and that sooner or later the truth was coming out. So why not get out in front of it? Why not hold a press conference and say the bare minimum? I didn't know he was a predator. I didn't know he was running a trafficking operation. I didn't participate. I was deceived. Say something. Instead, they lie, they minimize, they deny, they hang up the phone. And when the documents finally surface, the lies collapse in real time. That's exactly what just happened to Howard Lutnick, because here's the version he sold to the American people in the safest possible environment. A Rupert Murdoch-owned New York Post podcast, hosted by Miranda Devine, a Trump-aligned propagandist who exists to throw softball questions. Lutnick's story was simple. He said he bought his Upper East Side townhouse from Jeffrey Epstein in 2005. He said he and his wife walked next door, saw a massage table, heard creepy comments, got the heebie-jeebies, and that was it. Epstein was gross. He never wanted to be in the same room with him again. End of story. That was the impression. That was the lie. Because buried in the newly released Epstein documents is something far more damning. Not speculation, not rumor, not inference, documentation. On December 23rd, 2012, 7 years after Lutnick claimed he cut all ties, Howard Lutnick deliberately traveled to Little St. James Island, not by accident, not by coincidence, not because he bumped into Epstein. He arranged it. A 180-foot chartered yacht, Christmas Eve, his family, another couple, and a group of children, whose ages he personally listed in an email to Epstein's island manager, 12, 14, 11. He didn't just say 6 kids, he listed the ages, and let that sit for a moment, because this wasn't a quick hello. They went to the island. They had lunch. Epstein's staff later wrote that Jeffrey enjoyed meeting him. This was not a man who was so disgusted he couldn't be in the same room with Epstein. This was a man who, with full knowledge of Epstein's reputation by 2012, brought his family to the island for a pleasant lunch. And that single trip alone shatters everything Lutnick told the American people. But it doesn't stop there. The files show ongoing connections. Money donated by Epstein connected to Lutnick's charity events, email exchanges years later, joint efforts opposing construction projects in their neighborhood, including the Frick collection expansion, personal, financial, coordinated, all while Lutnick publicly maintained that his contact with Epstein ended in 2005. And here's where full transparency matters. I used to work for Howard Lutnick. I worked at Cantor Fitzgerald. I didn't know about these documents. Most people didn't. But now that we do, we have an obligation to talk about them out loud. Because the lie isn't just personal, it's institutional. This administration, Trump's administration, is the one producing these documents. And instead of accountability, we're getting denial at the highest levels. Just days ago, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche was asked a simple question. Will the public finally learn the identities of the men who abused these girls? His response was chilling. He rejected the premise of the question, as if it were absurd to suggest men abused women in Epstein's orbit. No urgency, no empathy, no acknowledgement of survivors, just bureaucratic denial. And when Epstein survivor Lisa Phillips heard that response, she physically shook. She said she felt sick, she wanted to cry, because the files contain names, testimony, patterns. And yet the Department of Justice is acting as though this is just a neutral document dump, not evidence of crimes that demand prosecution. Meanwhile, the Trump administration has the nerve to say, Trump's name is in the files, but he's been cleared. Cleared how? In 24 hours by whom? Based on what investigation? No federal agency moves that fast unless the conclusion was predetermined. And that brings us back to Howard Lutnick, because while all of this is happening, Lutnick's family business is thriving. Cantor Fitzgerald's profits are up nearly 30%. Taxpayer-backed investments are flowing into companies connected to his family office, rare earth deals, AI infrastructure, government-backed capital raises worth hundreds of billions. The same man lying about Epstein is benefiting directly from public power. And when reporters finally call him to comment on the new revelations, he says, "I had zero contact with Epstein." Then he hangs up. Zero contact? Except the house, except the island, except the donations, except the emails, except the coordination. We're only partway through millions of documents, and if this is what we're already seeing, what else is coming? Because the truth has a way of surfacing, and when it does, it doesn't just expose individuals, it exposes systems. If you're still wondering why these men don't get out in front of the Epstein story, here's the uncomfortable truth. Because the truth isn't survivable, not politically, not financially, not morally. This isn't about embarrassment, it's about exposure. Because once you start telling the truth, even a partial truth, the questions don't stop. They multiply. If Howard Lutnick had said, "Yes, I went to the island in 2012, but nothing happened," the very next question would have been, "Why were you there at all? Why bring your children? Why maintain contact with a man you publicly called gross? Why email his staff? Why accept his donations? Why coordinate projects with him years later?" And that's the trap these men are in. Once they tell any truth, the rest becomes unavoidable. So instead, they choose denial, even when denial is provably false. And that's not just a personal failure, it's a systemic one. Because what we're watching right now is not merely the slow drip of Epstein-related documents, we are watching institutional protection in real time. Look at the pattern. When the files are released, the administration frames it as transparency, but there is no parallel effort to investigate, no task force, no grand jury announcements, no accountability roadmap, just documents dumped without context and a shrug. And when reporters ask whether the names of abusers will be revealed, the response isn't outrage, it isn't empathy, it's rejection. I don't know what you mean by that. That line alone tells you everything, because every survivor knows what it means. Every prosecutor knows what it means. Every defense attorney knows what it means. Pretending otherwise isn't ignorance, it's strategy. And here's why. The Epstein operation was not a lone wolf situation. It wasn't one bad man and one accomplice. It was a network, money, transportation, access, influence, silence. Those things don't exist in a vacuum. They require participation, sometimes active, sometimes passive, from people who benefit from looking the other way. And when you read the Epstein files carefully, what jumps out isn't just the crimes, it's the normalization, private planes, casual island lunches, charity events, townhouses, cocktail conversations. Epstein wasn't hiding in the shadows, he was hosting. And that's why the most dangerous thing for these men isn't a single allegation, it's pattern recognition. Because once the public starts connecting timelines, who was where, when, and with whom, plausible deniability evaporates. Take Howard Lutnick again. The lie wasn't just that he never saw Epstein again, the lie was that the relationship was brief, incidental, and repulsive. The documents say otherwise. They show continuity, they show comfort, they show planning. And when confronted with that evidence, Lutnick didn't explain. He didn't contextualize, he didn't apologize, he hung up the phone. That's not confidence, that's panic. And it mirrors the broader response we're seeing from the Trump administration. Because let's be clear, this administration knows what's in those files. They know whose names appear. They know who maintained relationships after Epstein's conviction. They know who flew, who visited, who donated, who coordinated. And yet they want you to believe that after a lightning-fast review, everyone important has been cleared. That's not how justice works. That's how damage control works. And the reason this matters goes beyond Epstein. Because if powerful men can lie for years, deny documented facts, benefit financially from public office, and face zero consequences, then the lesson is clear. There is one set of rules for them and another for everyone else. That's why survivor reactions matter so much. When Lisa Phillips said she felt sick listening to DOJ officials reject the premise of abuse, she wasn't being emotional, she was being rational, because to survivors, denial isn't abstract, it's personal. It's the same dismissal they've heard for decades, only now it's coming from the highest levels of government. And here's the most disturbing part of all. We're not even halfway through the documents. Millions of pages remain, more emails, more flight logs, more financial records, more names. And the strategy seems to be release everything, say nothing, prosecute no one, and hope the public gets tired. That's the gamble. But history tells us something important. Silence doesn't end scandals. It extends them. Every lie requires maintenance. Every denial creates receipts. Every hang-up becomes evidence. And the more these men insist there's nothing there, the more people start asking why they're so afraid of scrutiny. Because innocent people don't fear transparency. They welcome it. So if you're asking yourself why none of these men get out in front of the story, why they don't just come clean, explain, and move on, here's the answer. They can't. Because the truth isn't a single sentence. It's a web. And once you pull one thread, the whole thing starts to unravel. We will keep following it. We will keep reading the documents. We will keep asking the questions they don't want answered, because accountability doesn't happen on its own. It has to be demanded. And now, more than ever, that demand matters. This story isn't going away, not this time.